Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Map Room. I'm your host, Eric Cunningham, and with us, as always, we have Nick Morris and Jared Stone. This week, we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to start a series of sorts on the state of Texas. Texas has gained a lot of attention in recent years as a potential Democratic flipping opportunity, whether it be becoming a toss-up state or becoming a blue state. Recent years have seen the state swing towards the Democratic Party, and it's done so because in large part due to shifts in some of the urban and suburban areas of the state. So this week, we're going to go over Harris County, Texas. It's the largest county in Texas and home to Texas's largest city, Houston. So I'm going to start with a map of the 2016 presidential race in Harris County. So you'll notice here that Hillary Clinton won the county by around 13 percentage points, which is what one might think would be typical of a large urban county, specifically somewhere like Texas. But in all actuality, this county has been very competitive in recent years. It's not truly swung to the Democratic Party until 2016. So obviously you could notice here the big urban core in the center is most of the city of Houston. And then you got these redder exurban and suburban areas that surround it. So we're going to show you the presidential result history, right? So you'll notice that for most of the last 50 years or so, it's been a pretty reliably Republican county, giving anywhere from 42 to 60% of the vote to Republicans. George Bush managed to win the county both in 2000 and in 2004, although with decreasing margins in 2004. And then it ultimately flipped to Barack Obama in 2008, as he performed considerably better in Texas than Democrats had previously. What a lot of people don't realize is just how close the county was. You'll notice right here that it was only 1,000 votes separating Mitt Romney from Barack Obama in Harris County. That's kind of a trend that kind of shows that Mitt Romney did do better in some of these urban, suburban areas that had swung away. Obviously, it wasn't enough to deliver him the national win, but doing better in places like Harris County is in part why he performed better there. So let's show you Texas overall, right? So in 2008, John McCain won it by about 12 percentage points, 13 percentage points. A pretty decent performance, but far lower than George Bush had performed in 2000 or in 2004. You'll notice that in this map that Harris County is blue along with Dallas County, Austin in that county right there, San Antonio, El Paso. So all of the large urban counties trending towards Democrats in that map. In 2012, Mitt Romney managed to improve there. He won it by closer to 15 or 16 percentage points. And you'll see that Harris County is much more competitive here. Then 2016 is kind of where the rails started to go off for the Republican Party in Texas. Notice that Donald Trump only won the state by around 9 percentage points. And part of that, he not only lost Harris County, he also lost neighboring Fort Bend County, a very large, diverse county with a growing population. His struggles in places like Harris County kind of exemplify the recent problems Republicans have had in urban and suburban areas, and it can easily be shown through the House races. So we'll start with the 2012 race. So you'll notice here there are several congressional districts that stretch into Harris County. There have been 8 congressional districts in Harris County. Yep, so there have been 8 congressional districts in Harris County, and Republicans had a 5-3 advantage. You'll notice these ring counties around the center are pretty red, 60 to 70% Republican, electing people like Ted Poe, John Culberson, Michael McCall, Pete Olson. And then the interior counties, that urban core that I showed earlier, strongly Democratic, 70 to 90% Democratic. In 2014, you'll notice the map is very similar. There's basically been no change at all. Just a little bit of a shift in the urban areas that have gone a little bit less Democratic. 2016, you see a massive shift here. So I'm going to go back and show you this again. So you look at these congressional districts right here. You got this district, this district, this district. All of them border around the city of Houston. 2014, very Republican, 60 to 70% of the vote, although closer to 60%. By 2016, these counties are very competitive. You have Ted Poe getting 60% of the vote in the 2nd district, but in the 10th and in the 9th or 7th districts, you only had John Culberson and Michael McCall winning with around 56 to 57%. You'll notice this district over here, which is Brian Babin's district, does not really change much at all because the sliver of Harris County that it has isn't enough to outweigh the rest of the district and actually has several red areas as well. So Democrats are obviously pretty optimistic with this vote share that they had improved. They could actually do better in some of these congressional districts. And you notice they did. They managed to perform very well in all of the districts, and they actually managed to win a majority by flipping the 7th congressional district. They managed to unseat incumbent John Culberson with a Lizzie Fletcher by around 5 percentage points. Dan Crenshaw won the 2nd district, which is right here. It's that little district that snakes through some of the wider areas of Houston and the exurbs. And then Republicans barely managed to hold on to the 10th and the 22nd districts. And so going into 2020, Democrats are hoping to gain even more in Harris County. So I'll show you the elections daily ratings that we have for Harris County. We have the district over here, the 36, which is Brian Babin's district, safe Republican. And then we have all 3 of the urban districts represented by Democrats like Sheila Jackson Lee, Al Green. Those aren't competitive at all. Very, very Democratic. And then so going into the less competitive ones, we have, or more competitive ones, we have the 2nd district is listed as likely Republican. The incumbent is Dan Crenshaw, who's nationally known. He's pretty well respected within the Republican caucus, and it's generally not seen that he's going to have a huge difficulty in winning, although obviously the possibility of him losing is there. So next up we have the 10th congressional district, which is Michael McCall's. That we have listed at lean Republican. It could be a competitive district in part because it stretches from some of the Austin areas into Harris County, which is just kind of a dangerous combination. So you'll notice the purple district right here is very competitive. We actually don't know the Republican nominee here. There's a primary going on, and so ultimately, depending on who the nominee is, this could change. We have it listed as a toss-up. The large portion of Fort Bend County and Harris County in there makes it very competitive. And then finally, disappointingly for Republicans, the 7th district, which they hope to reclaim, we have that listed at leans Democratic. Lizzie Fletcher is a reasonably decent incumbent, and even though Republicans have a very strong candidate in Wesley Hunt, who's been able to make some inroads into the area, the district has just started moving so rapidly to the Democratic Party that there are going to be issues in claiming it in the short and the long term. So that's kind of the overview of the federal side of things. I'm going to show one more federal map real quick, the Senate race in 2018. So I'm going to shift back and forth between the 2016 election and the 2018 election. So Hillary Clinton didn't really come close to winning Texas in 2016. But in 2018, Beto O'Rourke managed to get very close to winning the state. And that's in part because he did very well in places like Harris County. You'll notice that Ted Cruz managed to actually perform very similarly to Donald Trump at this county. He underperformed just a little bit. They both got around 41.5% of the vote. Where things changed was where Beto O'Rourke managed to win 58% of the vote. And one thing with these maps I want to give a plug for is our friend, my good friend Jim Newton from Elections Daily has made these maps. You can follow him on Twitter right there, as you can see from the watermark. But you can see that part of this reason he performed much better in Texas in 2018 was because of inroads into places like Harris County. You notice some of these areas in the interior shift more blue, and then you have some other areas around the outside as well. Harris County is a reason why Texas is considered to be leaning or trending towards the Democratic Party long term. But there's other reasons as well. So I'm going to throw it off to Nick, who's going to kind of go over some of the demographic traits of Harris County, the Houston area in general.
Harris County has been a county that has been growing pretty rapidly for the last few decades. You've had about 20-25% growth per decade in the last 50 years or so, which has been driving a lot of the political shifts in the county. You'll see from this map that is in front of us now that you have a heavy minority population. In the center of the county, you have a lot of African Americans, but you have a lot more Hispanics in the eastern part, and they are pretty much where the most blue areas of the county are.
And with this map that we're showing right here, just to be clear, the green are Hispanics, the blue are black voters, and the red are white voters.
Yeah, right. That's right. So as you can see, like you have small patches of African Americans, but it's mostly Hispanics. Mostly, they make up the majority of that minority population in the county. But what's more interesting to look at is the western part of the county. You got a lot of areas of Houston, and you got a lot of suburbs there as well. And they are the areas we have seen massive swings in the 7th in particular. This went from a heavily Republican district back in 2012, and it has been like that for decades. As you can see from this map, Bob Dole won it by over 30 points. And then in 2016, surprisingly, Hillary Clinton won it. No one expected that to happen. And that is pretty indicative of the large suburban shifts that have been happening in this sort of area. And it has been bigger than most areas in the country. The 7th district is actually the district that swung the most from Mitt Romney to Hillary Clinton that wasn't in Utah.
Okay, so Nick and Eric both gave very good demonstrations about the political demography and the geography of various regions of the Houston area. And I actually want to go a little bit more into the specific and granular details of Houston politics before we go into some really specific things about Texas House districts and the demography of various surrounding areas of Harris County and Houston itself. So I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is a map of the districts that constitute Houston and Harris County itself. You can see that there are some that are completely confined within Harris County, while there are others that jut a little bit into Harris County, but encompass surrounding regions or counties of Harris County. So I want to split this into a few different sections to demonstrate some of the important trends and factors that we're seeing here. The first one I want to go into basically are the urban districts that constitute the urban core of Houston. And there are 3 I want to go into specifically. You have the 18th here, which is shaped like a crescent, represented by Sheila Jackson Lee, who's pretty entrenched in the area. And this constitutes large swaths of minorities, has a heavy population of African Americans and Latinos. Then you have the 29th, which goes a little bit into the 18th, but is also shaped like a crescent. This one happens to be the other way. The 29th was actually represented by Jean Green for a while until the 2018 midterms. And now Sylvia Garcia is representative of the 29th, and she happens to be the first Latina representative from the Houston area. And finally, for the urban districts, you have the 9th district right here. The 9th district is held by Al Green, who is quite notable for bringing up various impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives. The 9th, as you can see, goes into a section of urban Houston, but actually delves into parts of Fort Bend County right here, which is a suburban county that I'll be talking about at length after this. It goes into places like Mission Bend, Missouri City, as well as parts of Sugar Land, which are the more democratic areas and growing areas of Fort Bend County. The second type of district that I want to talk about right now are some of the more suburban districts that line the west side of Houston, that are growing in population, that have large swaths of college-educated voters, and that are really defining a lot of the trends that we're seeing in Harris County in general. I want to start with the second, which I would say is the least consequential out of these districts. The second was made as a Republican vote sink because even though it takes in parts of urban Houston, which is generally very blue, the anchor of the district is actually this triangular shaped section right here, which encompasses such cities as Spring, Kingwood, and Humble. And if you're from Texas, you might know the city as Humble. Is currently represented by Dan Crenshaw, who is quite notable after an experience he had with Saturday Night Live and Pete Davidson. It was formerly represented by Ted Poe. And again, the reason why this district is so Republican is because of the anchor, the bastion of Republicanism that you see here in the northern Houston suburbs. That's why this district as a whole leans more Republican than most. Then I want to go to the 7th district. And the 7th is one of 2 I want you to keep your eyes on, especially as we keep going in this episode. The 7th is represented by Lizzie Pinnell Fletcher, who's a freshman Democrat. Now, the irony is that the 7th was actually drawn as a Republican vote sink back with the previous redistricting by Texas Republicans. The reason why is because this actually takes in some of the most Republican or traditionally Republican areas of Houston itself. This section right here basically encompasses western Houston, West Houston. And then you see this arm that juts into the immediate suburbs of Houston, taking in such cities as Bel Air and West University Place, which have historically leaned very strongly Republican. Even in 2012, as recently as that election, Mitt Romney won this district by 21%. However, because this district has a large constituency of college-educated white suburban voters, this district voted for Hillary Clinton by 1%. And it showed the largest swing from a Democrat or from a Republican to a Democrat between the 2 elections on the presidential level. Then you have the 10th here, which I'm going to juxtapose with the 7th later, especially in my article that I'll talk about. The 10th here is represented by Michael McCall, who's a Republican who's from this city called Tomball. Tomball is in Western Harris County. It is a more exurban community, but it really shows you some of the most important factors and some of the most important characteristics of the 10th district. The 10th district looks here like a pretty vast and rural district that extends out into central Texas. Now, this is true. And the central Texas component of the 10th district is highly Republican, as is this Harris County portion. And you can see by the perforated lines here that it extends largely into Harris County. However, this district did vote very narrowly for Beto O'Rourke over Ted Cruz in 2018. And the reason why is because Texas Republicans back in the previous redistricting decided to take a little piece of Austin, which is a very blue and very liberal city, and put it into the 10th district. And the Republican areas used to be able to easily overwhelm the Austin part, but now because of astronomical population growth in Austin, this is not the case anymore. So keep those two districts in mind for a little bit later. So now I'm going to go into the third section of districts that I want to discuss at length in the Houston/Harris County area. And these are the districts that constitute the surrounding suburban regions or counties of the Houston area. And there are two that I want to go into very specifically. The 22nd district, you can see right here, is mostly anchored in Fort Bend County, bar some of these areas, these Democratic bastions that are included in the 9th. And the 22nd extends out into Brazoria County right here, as well as a little bit of Harris County. And so it actually constitutes 3 counties. However, it really is representative of Fort Bend County itself. The 22nd district was made as a safe Republican district. It voted Republicans easily by double digits up until very recently. And even with Trump's struggles among suburbanites, he still won the 22nd by 8%. And so again, the reason why is because it is slightly gerrymandered. These places like Mission Bend, Missouri City, which are more Democratic and cause the county to lean more Democratic nowadays, are included in this 9th district. And therefore, the 22nd has more of a Republican bent. However, things are changing now, especially because this county has become so diverse. Non-Hispanic whites are now a sizable minority of the population, and Asians and African Americans, as well as Hispanics, now basically form the rest of the demographics of this region. And so it's a pretty even split among all of those minority groups as well as whites. And that's one of the reasons why Fort Bend County, as well as the 22nd district, are becoming so competitive nowadays. Ted Cruz won this district very narrowly in his 2018 senatorial bid, even as this district was made to be a Republican haven, essentially a Republican vote sink in the outlying regions of Houston. Now, I want to juxtapose that with the 8th district, which you can see up here. It's hard to see all of it because it constitutes basically all of Montgomery County, which is just north of Harris County. But the 8th includes such places as the Woodlands and parts of Spring and Tomball, as I mentioned earlier. And the 8th is far less racially diverse. The 8th includes a vast majority of its residents as non-Hispanic whites, and minorities simply do not have the power or the constituency to make such inroads for the Democrats there as they do for the 22nd. And because the 8th district is so overwhelmingly white and non-Hispanic, it remains safely Republican to this day. And so the representative there, Kevin Brady, is going to have absolutely no issue returning himself to Congress in 2020. The final area or section of Houston districts that I want to go over is just one district, basically. It's the 36th district right here. The 36th is actually pretty rural. It extends out into East Texas, but it takes in a pretty large chunk of eastern Harris County right over here, including such cities as Baytown and Pasadena right over here. And the 36th is a safely Republican district. And one of the reasons why is because it takes in this highly Republican region of Harris County. And as I'm going to go into a little bit after, Harris County is not monolithic. And while the county itself is moving in a very Democratic and leftward direction, there are sections of the county which are highly white, highly non-college educated, and are more exurban or rural. And that's causing those regions not only to stay heavily Republican, but to actually swing more to the Republicans in recent years as party polarization has become so prevalent in international politics. So now that we've gone into the actual districts that constitute Harris County, I'm going to show you some important pieces of information that help explain some of the political trends that we're seeing. And the first is having to do with those outlying suburban districts like the 22nd in Fort Bend, as well as the 8th in Montgomery County. And to explain why they're moving in such opposite directions politically, I have here from the US Census Bureau the demography of those various counties. Now, Fort Bend County, Texas, which I'm showing right now, has around 811,000 people. This is obviously a lot higher now, just because of the explosion of population that we're seeing in that county. However, if you look at non-Hispanic white, they make up 32% of the total population. Not a lot, especially considering the fact that they were a majority not that long ago. I mean, it was just a matter of decades that things have changed so rapidly. However, African Americans who are concentrated in those places that I was talking about, like Mission Bend and Missouri City, are around 21% of the population. Asians, which are a burgeoning constituency in the region, are now also at 21% of the population, whereas Hispanics constitute a quarter or 25% of the total population. And so a truism of Fort Bend County, as well as the 22nd district, is that you have cattle ranches and Hindu temples in very close proximity. It's just that diverse, and really is a microcosm of the types of diversity that we're seeing all across suburban regions across the US. Now, going over to Montgomery County, which is completely opposite actually. White alone, non-Hispanic, 64% of the population, a clear majority. And when you take all whites together, it's 88% of the population. Minorities constitute a very low percentage of the population here. And while Hispanics are around 25% of the population, that's basically the only substantial minority presence here. And so you can see from here that Montgomery County is far more white, and therefore it's moving less democratic than the 22nd is. And so the 8th district has remained much more strongly Republican than the 22nd has. That's sort of a demographic overview of those. I'm now going to show you just a little map that I made. I made this as a potential map for the Texas Republicans following the 2020 decade reapportionment and census. And you can see some of the areas of Republican and Democratic support here. I made the 7th of Democratic vote sync that extends into the more Democratic areas of Fort Bend County. As you can see here that Fort Bend County has a lot of Democratic support, especially in these border areas with Harris County. But nevertheless, Montgomery County right here, which I'm outlining right now, still strongly Republican. There's no reason for Montgomery County to move to the Democratic column for a long time. It's safely Republican at this point. Now I want to go into the 36th district, which I talked to you about a little bit, which takes in a large swath of eastern Harris County, which is more exurban, more rural, and much more white, and therefore it is friendly to Republicans. This is a map actually of the Texas State House. It shows you all of the hundreds of House districts that line Texas and that are spread out across Texas. If you look at the Harris County inset, which is right here, you can see this little red district in eastern Harris County, which is the 128th House district. And in fact, I wrote an article about the very controversial representative of this district, the 128th, because it is emblematic of the types of trends that we're seeing in eastern Harris County, even as the county itself is moving more to the left. And this is my article that I wrote about these trends, and you can find this on Elections Daily. I call it The Tale of Two Districts, Polarizing Voting Patterns in Harris County, Texas. And if we go down, you can see some of the information that I wrote about this very unique 128th House district. Its representative is Briscoe Cain. And Briscoe Cain gained a lot of notoriety when he shared a tweet basically fighting back against Beto O'Rourke and his claim that he would confiscate guns from US citizens. And you might think that Briscoe Cain, as a Republican who is saying these types of things, would be vulnerable in Harris County, considering how much it's moving to the left. However, this is not the case, because Briscoe Cain's district voted for Trump by an overwhelming 40-point margin. And so his district clearly bucks the trends that we're seeing throughout Harris County. And this is because his district is far more white, far less college educated, and far more exurban and rural than the county itself. And so not only has this House district, HD 128, remained strongly Republican, but in fact, it has become more Republican and swung more to the right, especially as the parties are consolidating different coalitions. And so I'm not going to go through all this article. I think that's a pretty good overview. And again, you can find this article on Elections Daily. I wrote it back in February, but I also talk about the 7th District and the 10th District at length. The fact that the 7th District, which is part of suburban Houston, actually used to vote more Republican than the 10th District, which I was talking about, which extends over into Austin. But because the 10th District has more rural and exurban territory than the 7th, nowadays the 10th votes more to the right than the 7th in most elections.
So yeah, that's definitely an interesting look for Jared had, and that even though you have some of these areas in states that are trending blue, like in Houston, you have those areas that are the exurban regions that are still trending towards Republicans, where they can still crack out a few more votes from some of those exurban areas. And reasons like that are why the state or the county party is able to remain kind of relevant in some ways. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share and show you some of the county level offices, because Harris County is a very large county and has a large number of county officers, the majority of which used to be affiliated with Republicans, but since 2018, many of them have flipped to the Democratic Party. And this has kind of existed at all levels of Harris County government. So this is what the government looked like after the 2016 elections. So you notice Democrats have a relatively strong presence. For example, the constables, they have a majority of constables, but Republicans have a majority of the school trustees. They have the treasurer, county clerk, district clerk, and county judge, while Democrats have a few other offices of miscellaneous sort. They also had a 3-to-1 advantage on the commissioner's court, which is the equivalent of a legislature, county legislature for Harris County, and the county judge, who serves kind of as the executive of the county. So that's 2016. You'll notice by 2018, a lot of that Republican strength has vanished. Probably the most striking loss for Republicans was losing all of the countywide offices. So you notice they lost all the offices. For example, in 2016, that the district clerk and the county clerk and the treasurer, those all went to the Democratic Party in 2018. The most embarrassing loss was probably for county judge, where the incumbent Republican lost a race to Lena Hidalgo, a mid-20s millennial who had very little experience in government and was kind of seen as a relatively odd fit for the office of county judge, which is the most important executive office in Harris. So you'll notice here that she managed to defeat the incumbent, Emmett, by 1.6% of the vote. And kind of that whole term we're showing here, that kind of white pocket around here, the interior kind of does all right. And then they do well in the exurbs surrounding the city and some of the suburbs. But that urban strength in Houston was just too much for Emmett to overcome. And so why is this important? Well, obviously Harris County is a large county, and the Commissioner's Court has a pretty important role. It's like any other county legislature. So the current, this is the current layout of the Commissioner's Court. So the executive officer is, of course, Lena Hidalgo. You can see here she's very young. She's under 30. So she's very different from the other figures on this, who are mostly who are either white or Hispanic, older men. I believe Rodney Ellis is African American. But so you notice here these commissioner lines are pretty creative in how they're drawn. So the Democrats, obviously, they have the first two of the commissioner seats. And they tried to kind of pack some of the urban areas into the more rural eastern portions of Harris County that we showed earlier that Jared was able to show to you. But Democrats were able to overcome it and take over that seat. Republicans still have, however, 2 seats on the commission. They have the 3rd precinct, which shifts, which obviously goes into that little center area that Republicans still do all right in. And then you have the 4th precinct. This is important because the 3rd precinct is actually a likely pickup opportunity for Democrats in the future. They could easily possibly gain a 3rd spot in the commission, which would give them control of the county commission, or as they call it, the Commissioner's Court. So obviously, if you want to kind of compare what I was showing right here, so you see these lines right here, for example, the 3rd over there, it extends into some of the urban areas of Houston. So we go down to this, the 2016 race. You'll notice that it draws in a lot of this more bluish area over here, and then some of these really deep blue areas around here. And this area was just so overwhelming that the 2nd commissioner's office was able to flip as well. So overall, if you're a Harris County Republican, there's a lot of concerns to have. There are actually still officers that can lose. Some of those trustee officers, constables, and of course the 2 commissioners. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind in the future as well. and especially in such a large and important county in Texas. Overall, what we're seeing in Harris County is kind of indicative of what's happening in the rest of the state. As we'll go over in future episodes, like for example, Dallas County, I believe we'll go over Dallas-Fort Worth perhaps in the near future. But you're seeing a very similar trend in that county, except it's much more starkly contained in the county of Dallas. Whereas here, it's pretty much city of Houston growing and overwhelming. And it's not like the city of Houston is, in theory, lost for Republicans at the local level. Up until recently, Republicans have been able to be competitive in some of the mayoral races. But due to Democratic strength, the mayoral vote and vote shares in the city of Houston, which is the most Democratic part of the county, was able to pretty much mirror the countywide result in terms of the vote. That's kind of the 54 or 57 to 41 split. So even in a place where Republicans were able to be competitive until recently, you're starting to see that declining Republican strength. So overall, I'm just going to pull up one more thing here to kind of give you an idea of the problem Republicans are facing in Texas. People think of Texas as a predominantly rural state because it is so large and because it has so many counties, most of which are rural. The assumption is that obviously most of the people must live in the rural areas and they kind of overwhelm the urban vote. The problem is that's not the case. So I'll go ahead and pull up this demographic map right here. Not demographic map, sorry, the population map. So you notice most of Texas is pretty barren. Geographically, outside of El Paso, most of western Texas is fairly lowly populated. You have some cities in the Rio Grande Valley that are fairly growing rapidly. But other than that, this part of the state is pretty barren. It's eastern Texas that's seeing this kind of the starkest population growth. Places like San Antonio and the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but also the Houston metropolitan area, which does extend beyond just Harris County into places like Fort Bend. As Texas continues to grow, and most of this growth comes from these urban and suburban areas, many of which were Republican strongholds for decades, Republicans are going to kind of have to scramble to regain some of that rural vote, or some of the vote share overall. So, for example, let me show you 2016. You'll notice right here, most of those rural counties are very Republican already. It's very hard for them to become more conservative than they are at the moment. And even then, these areas aren't entirely unpopulated. You have cities like Midland and Odessa that are in Laredo, that are in Texas in general, that are growing rapidly as well. Some of these areas around the valley that you could think they could have some room to grow, they have very large Hispanic populations. So even though they're not that appealing of a target, whereas Democrats are gaining, of course, in Austin and in Dallas-Fort Worth area and in the Houston metropolitan area, but chiefly in Harris County and in Fort Bend. As we'll explain in future episodes, those shifts are something Republicans will have to deal with if they want to remain competitive in Texas in the future. And they'll have to deal with this if they are able to draw the districts in the next decade, as it is assuming they manage to maintain control of the legislature at all, because the state house is actually in play due in part to some of those house districts that Jared mentioned earlier. So overall, hope this was an informative look at Harris County, and we're going to continue looking at Texas for the next few episodes. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of a baseline of kind of the Republican decline in Harris County, one of the largest counties in the state, and one of the most important counties for Democrats that they're hoping to gain control. So with that, I think we'll end this week's edition of the Map Room. So where can we follow you guys on social media?
So you can find me on Twitter at JStonePolitics. That's my Twitter handle.
You can find me on Twitter too. My handle is TossUpReport.
And you can follow me at DECunningham2 on Twitter. And you can find all of our writings at Elections Daily. You can go to the website and elections-daily.com, go to the author section and easily find what we've written. So with that, we'll end this week's edition of the Map Room. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.